Lee Cronin is a true mad scientist. He's a professor of chemistry in Glasgow, where he's also the founder of Chemify. This is a company that has invented a new type of approach to accomplishing chemistry, very analogous to using the tool chain that we use in computers and then adapting that to chemistry. That's what Lee has been trying to do. I think this analogy holds very tightly. He's built this machine called a computer, which is basically a 3D printer for chemistry. To make that work, he had to make a programming language for chemistry. He had to make a GitHub for chemistry. He basically had to rebuild the whole stack that we use in software, but for chemistry. And that's very important because chemists are still acting in this kind of dark ages voodoo modality where it's very difficult for somebody in one chemistry lab to replicate what you did in another one. And so this is going to really change the way that chemists work because they'll have a very systematic and replicable approach to what they do. As Lee will explain in our conversation, it opens up a whole window of opportunities. Lee is a legitimate professor. He's the Regis Chair of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow. He's graduating PhDs in chemistry. They're doing all kinds of amazing stuff. And I think in part because they're stuck in remote Scotland, there's just no adult supervision, and these people are able to think freely and go do amazing stuff. On top of this, if you don't know about Lee or some of the other things we don't get into, I highly recommend you listen to his conversation with Lex Friedman on that podcast, which is also wonderful and goes deep.
I've never met anyone like it.
He could hack anybody's phone in a matter of minutes. Who is that guy? Who can do that?
Thomas is the most interesting man in the world.
He's one of my favorite people on the planet.
Inventor.
Wicked smart.
The master of cutting corners.
If you had a dead body in your trunk, who would you call?
He would get arrested immediately in a lineup.
I stood in line to get his autograph.
You know, his mouth can barely keep up to his brain.
I don't actually know what Pablos does.
A hacker magician.
Man of the future. 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 Future.
One of my favorite things about what you're doing is that the analogies hold very tightly, or you seem to be inspired by the architecture of how we do stuff with computers. So everything from Turing machines up through programming languages and compilers and GitHub and all that. So you've used that as kind of the inspirational model for what you built with Chemify. So I think we should just talk about that.
I mean, a Chemify is like, it's work in progress, but it's really exciting.
Yeah.
The backstory to that was I'm always, obsessed is the wrong word. I've always liked playing with computers and trying to build my own. And I think nowadays, actually, lots of people, because computing science has come so far.
Yeah.
In actually quite a short space of time, specialization is amazing, right? I had really little appreciation for the engineering, proper software engineering, not scripting and hacking that academics do.
Or hackers.
Yeah. When we try to deploy a product like we're doing at Chemify for internally. But it goes back to this kind of fusion of I wanting to ask questions and I want to use the most advanced technology to help me ask those questions as quickly as possible rather than literally recreate the wheel, and also borrow from fields. So computer science is a really good one. So the kind of analogy, I suppose, or not analogy, it is directly maps, is to say, is chemistry still analog?
Yeah.
And why did mathematics become digital? Well, the first question is like, no, silly, because mathematics is digital and chemistry isn't. And you're like, well, there's this thing called the periodic table.
Yeah.
And the increasing atomic numbers.
Yeah.
That looks pretty digital to me.
Okay.
And there's this thing called valence, which kind of holds pretty well for most molecules. And that's pretty digital to me. And I'm just thinking, that's kind of cool. If I was a little, a chemical Maxwell demon, not just a Maxwell demon. So a physicist Maxwell demon is just a demon opening and shutting a door, letting gas atoms from one box to another.
Right.
But a chemical Maxwell demon, or maybe a Chemify demon, would be a little demon that could basically take that atom, and add them together according to a lookup table and say, all right, Viagra, ibuprofen, or Adderall, or whatever, Advil. And here's the molecules. And that seemed really kind of nice, right? Because you've then got this formal record, and you know what you're trying to build. But chemistry isn't like that. Chemistry is all pots and potions and mixing liquids. But actually, when I was setting out, I asked a couple of really questions that kind of involved, I guess, my entire academic life. My secret is I've only ever had one question. But that question is actually deeply interesting, which is and it's similar to lots of people, why do we exist? But you want to unpack that and say, well, why did biology choose this subset of chemistry? And you say, and how do we search chemistry? This idea is kind of also merged with my hobby of being very interested in computer science theory and complexity theory. Well, I remember when I was about 18, and it was like chaos theory was super in vogue and everything was interesting there, and there was just enough computer power available to start to see that fractals were doing something interesting and people were playing with cellular automata. And so I was fascinated with that. But at the same time, I became a chemist. And when I did my degree, I was making molecules by hand. I wanted to learn crystallography and learn how to kind of get crystal structures of molecules.
Okay.
And then when I became an academic, I was like, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I was like, well, I actually just want to answer the why am I here? And so how can I get the taxpayer and industry to pay for that?
Okay.
And so I wrote some proposals about, I want to make a digital origin of life engine. Let me just explain maybe a couple of things, origin of life and the engine idea. So back in the 1950s, some chemists did a very simple experiment where they took a piece of a glass vessel and they put into electrodes and put in them some lightning. And then they added in some very simple chemicals. So they added in water, hydrogen, ammonia, and methane. And you think, oh, that's kind of simple. So you've got basically H2, CH4, NH3, and H2. And the idea is these are simple molecules, right? These molecules only have one heavy atom. So water, oxygen, 2 atoms of hydrogen, methane, carbon, 4 atoms of hydrogen, ammonia, nitrogen, heavy atom, 3 atoms of hydrogen. And so put in some energy and heat it up and see what happens. Yeah. And all these atoms will smash together and you just make a massive mess, a combinatorial mess. And so no one really got that far with it. People are still analyzing it today. And actually in my lab, we have a Miller-Urey kind of setup.
What do you get out of there? Like a bunch of weird gases?
Just trillions and trillions.
Are they like longer chains of hydrocarbons?
Just basically a combinatorial explosion.
Oh, okay.
I would view it a bit like a game of life and all the different rules, and you just get a load of different patterns in molecule space. So I was like, that's cool, but I ain't going to solve the origin of life doing this, right? I was wondering, could I somehow build a search engine to search chemical space? Because, well, what do search engines do? Well, they take the internet and they index everything, and then there's a big database. It's like, well, could I just generate a database of all the possible molecules combinatorially? C1, C2, C3, C3, N1, O1, and keep going and keep going.
Okay.
I thought I'd start to write a grant, and I could imagine a kind of state machine and a way of searching and using spectroscopy to find out. Anyway, I started talking to people about my origin of life machine. They became bored. Yeah. They didn't understand the disciplines, chemistry, computer science, and information theory. Mm-hmm. And they didn't see any practical relevance. So I couldn't get funding. So I'm like, I need money to make a search engine. No one will give me any money. I'll tell you what. I'll tell everyone we're going to make drugs. Yeah. And then suddenly everyone went, that's a cool idea. You're going to use robots to make drugs? Yeah. And this kind of happened in the transformation. It was about 2011, 2012. Okay. I gave a TED talk around that time where I presented the origin of life stuff. But then the following year, I gave a 3-minute audience participation talk where I said, let's 3D print drugs. Yeah. Right? And I went back to my research group and said, good news is we're going to buy some robots. The bad news is I've already told the world what they can do. And they were like, what? And I mean, I didn't make it up, right? Yeah. I didn't lie. I just said, wouldn't it be cool if we could 3D print drugs? And obviously, all the chemists were kind of, 3D print? What do you mean 3D print? Yeah. And I was, and I
weren't sure either yet.
And I was like, well, okay, you can't 3D print a molecule. That's silly. And then I thought, oh, that's a cool idea. I could take the RipRap 3D printer, which is a nice kit. Wow. And I then built some pumps. And each pump I added, so I thought, what is the simplest molecule I can make? It's a non-inflammatory pain med, a very simple one called ibuprofen. Yeah. And I only needed 4 inputs. Okay. And these were all in liquid, so you could dissolve up. You could take the solid, what we call reagent, if you're a chemist, you take the input material, dissolve it in some liquid, and put it in the pump. And I connected each of the pumps to a COM port. 4 COM ports, right? Turned the pump on for this amount of time, squirted in there. And I made a STL file, which is a 3D coordinate file, for my test tube. Okay. So the 3D printer used polypropylene, a plastic, 3D printed the test tube, and then moved to one side, and then there were 4 syringes, and we had the coordinates for each syringe to poke in, COM port 1 open, add reagent, COM port 2, add reagent, COM port 3, add reagent, COM port 4, add reagent. And then the heat bed, I was like, I can use the heat bed to heat up the reaction. Heat it up and shook it because I had no stirrer. And so it shook it, heated it, and made ibuprofen in a 3D printer. So the 3D printer did cause a print of a drug. And everyone got very angry with this. I couldn't publish the paper.
What was the main contention here?
They thought it was imbecilic.
Oh, okay.
And I was being like stupid.
Yeah.
And I kind of was.
Yeah.
I was kind of playing around like, this is cool, But I was really like, the COM ports are connected to some chemistry. It's like I've literally connected the periodic table.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not a atom compiler yet, but I can see it. And then I started to think about writing programming language. And I thought, and at this time I still have a big lab, but the lab was very manual and we used to discover really gigantic molecules. And the way we would do it, we would basically mix together some building blocks, a bit like, I suppose, just some bricks, like Lego bricks. And they would self-assemble and we'd grow a crystal, get lucky, get this fantastic, pretty structure of this new molecule that could do all this thing. But typically, we get lucky and we can never reproduce it, or it would take years to reproduce it because you couldn't record the recipe with enough clarity to then reproduce it. And I thought, if only I had because I'd go to the student, interrogate them, well, not interrogate them. No. We would kind of brainstorm, actually. It's like, did you add A to B? Maybe. What type of test tube did you use? Was it washed in the base bath? Was it clean? And they're like, I used to grow. I got pretty long eyelashes, still have, right? And when I was a PhD student, I used to be looking in my crystallization devices, and my best crystals were basically on eyelashes that had fallen out of my eye.
Wow!
I was like, and I remember that I couldn't reproduce one crystal because I didn't. So I actually had to cut off an eyelash and put it in there to grow the crystal. So I was like,
you needed a nucleation site.
And hair is quite a good the peptide on hair is quite good for growing these things.
Oh, okay.
So I was telling the student this. He's like, I don't have any eyelashes. I was like, no, but you know what I mean? You must have done something. And then we kept brainstorming and I said, well, let's just write a programming language, in like remote control student language, I called it. And that was, back then that was fine. I think if I said that now, I'd probably be cancelled by not being politically correct.
Remote control student language?
Yeah. And then they said, well, why don't we call it chi-DL? Chi for chemistry, DL, description language. So the Greek letter chi. And so we wrote it, and I went, and that student thought it was fun. We went to the lab, and I said, everyone, the good news is you're never going to make any mistakes ever again because everything's going to be documented and audited. Yeah. And the bad news is that you've got to follow this protocol strictly, otherwise it's not going to work. The programming language isn't going to work. And my group literally kind of just threw me out of the lab.
Oh, they didn't like this idea.
Get out.
Because they were chemists.
They were chemists. Well, but I kind of presented it wrongly, so I made fun. And I was not of them, but of the process of reproducibility. And then I went back a few days later. I went away and I wrote the language, or finished writing language, because it's not that complicated. Because when I mean a language, it was literally, let's have a series of unit operations that are declarative, and I have labels for them: add, stir, shake. It's
cool.
Not that hard. Add A to B with this rate, with heating, blah, blah, blah. So it's just about literally
shake and bake.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I went back to the lab and said, okay, my bad. How about we just build some robots and we basically automate, the bench chemist to make things less onerous. And you get to do some programming, you get to do some cool stuff. I'll buy a 3D printer and we'll just hack around. And when that's a really cool idea. And then the team started to develop. So we started to think about what are the minimum number of viable modules to automate all of chemistry, or almost all of chemistry. It's like, what is the chemistry transistor? Well, and in a way, in logic, I guess the most fundamental unit of logic is a NAND gate. Yeah. And I guess if you
how many gates do you need for
exactly?
chemistry?
So how many transistors do you need? And at that time, I was kind of messing around with FPGAs. And I was like, drawing out all the gates and so on, and then thinking, well, it's quite repetitious. Yeah, I can use Verilog or whatever, and I can use libraries. And I was playing around with LabVIEW as well. So LabVIEW for operating flow diagrams, and you could drop and pick and place modules, and you could kind of write programs. in LabVIEW that were interfaced with data collection software.
Yeah.
So you could become a kind of what I would call an embodied programmer, if you like, because you physically embody your code and you can have in there. So I had this so in my spare time I was playing with FPGAs at home, using LabVIEW in the lab with my team. That's kind of the only thing I did to start with that I was allowed in the lab to do, because I got quite good at it. So, and then we were thinking, well, we need to make this. We need to kind of figure out how these modules come together for chemistry. And I'm not a trained computer scientist, so
me either. It's okay.
What I mean, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I understood. I mean, I think I understood how to build abstractions.
Sure.
And it's becoming quite clear to me I was quite good at those. So what I was working with my team is getting them saying, oh, how about this? And they would go away and say, no, that doesn't work because you haven't got this primitive and you can't do that and you can't purify this. So I then go in and say, what about this solution? They're like, yeah, okay, but now you don't have this action.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was trying to do is replicate all their actions, but restrict it. And it inspired, the thing that inspired me there when I was a kid, I was obsessed with survival kits.
Okay.
Right? I wanted my autonomy. I'm kind of a rebel. I want full autonomy. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do.
So what was a survival kit when you were a kid? Like duct tape and baling wire?
You'd have a knife and some wire and shelter.
Swiss Army knife.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I would put them in, obsessed with boxes of
Yeah.
how I could position these things.
Yeah.
And I realized there was too much to carry around, right? And I was
did the same thing. I had like a briefcase I got from my dad. It had walkie-talkies in it.
Nice.
It had a tape recorder with a microphone. It had duct tape. Yeah, I was like, and I would take it with me. I'm like in 4th grade or something. I would take it around, and I was like prepared all the time for some action that never happened.
Have your NBC kit, your nuclear.
Yeah, I always wanted
kit.
a grappling hook. I never had a grappling hook.
That would have been cool. Yeah, I mean, so I had this survival kit.
Okay. And
I wanted to then make the minimal survival kit.
Yeah.
So, and this is actually where assembly theory came from as well. But this kind of, like I say, I only have one idea.
We'll put that off.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one idea, and I was like, well, what is the tool that I can use to make the tool to make the tool to make the tool? So all I need is information.
I get it.
Same thing in chemistry, right? Computer scientists do this all the time. They basically make a small fragment of code, and then they change abstraction, go up and up and up until this code can be general purpose. I mean, you think we use OpenCV now? Image recognition is easy.
Yeah.
If you had to write all that code every single time,
which is basically what we used to have to do,
and that's what chemists still do today.
I see.
It's kind of insane.
Very good analogy. So if you learned to write assembly language, or even even BASIC or Fortran or Pascal or something, there's no libraries. You basically write everything from scratch every time. And now kids these days don't know, because they have like a pile of Lego bricks that came with their SDK, including OpenCV. And so they just stick Lego bricks together that are super abstracted. And you could get a PhD in computer science and not know how a chip works. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah,
but you get more done.
And I think it's fascinating that kind of chemistry was left out. So with my team, I was like, so we're going to build what we call the Chemputer. In fact, I didn't even call it the Chemputer.
Yeah.
The name came from a reporter came to see me.
Okay.
And to talk about my Origin of Life engine that I was building as well.
All right.
Because I hadn't really told my team about the Origin of Life engine yet.
But
we were buying pumps and valves and putting stuff together. And then the guy wrote the article for the Guardian, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it. It's like the article came out, the Chemputer that can print any drug. I was like, such a cool name.
It is.
And so I kept it.
Probably should have been the Chem Printer.
Well, no. So I like Chemputer for 3 or 4 reasons. Because when I knew, it's like as a scientist, I'm always trying to do something new to get people to think, differentiate, the works, push things forward, and think in a new way. Because that's what floats my boat. For me to do new things that are kind of non-obvious is something I like to do.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize. I just thought I was so inarticulate. But I was realizing when you're doing new things, you don't have a language in which to express them because they are new.
That's right. That's right.
And
it's such an important observation. And it's why so many people who are creative, people who are inventive, they sound crazy because they're describing something that you haven't heard before and words that you haven't used in that way before. And it's so easy to dismiss people like that because their ideas sound crazy. And what you really should probably interpret that as is like, you're fucking crazy because your feeble brain can only handle things you've seen before. And so I think it's a really important observation for creative people and inventors to understand, like, when you're in that situation, when you're describing something new and nobody's getting it, it does not necessarily mean you might also be crazy. And there are plenty of those people too, but this is not how you tell.
Yeah. Learning to differentiate between those things is something super interesting. And I used to go around, I get, again, nowadays, my reputation was that I was really critical. But most of my criticism is, what does that work? I don't think that sounds right. Did you make that up? Is that real? Don't worry about making it up. If you made it up, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not accusing you of fraud, but is this a concept you get bottled out? And, by poking, you can determine. And so this word computation or computer, the noun is the computer and the verb is computation. I was like, I just took, to start with, I just took the word computer. I had no idea about the way I was trying to build the abstraction. The feeling I had in my head was, code is easy to code stuff. There's hardware out there. I can kind of see that chemistry can be encoded, and there's a minimum unit that's going to work for all chemistry, with some notable edge cases. And in the situation where it doesn't work for that chemistry, I would have a module and I'd add on the new function. So what I realized now, looking back, is like the abstraction I was building for chemistry was like, in chemistry, you only need to do 4 things. You need to do the reaction, number 1. Once the reaction is completed, you do what's called a workup, number 2. Then after you do a workup, you then isolate the material, number 3. And then once you isolate the material, you purify it so you have pure material, number 4. 4 things that you need to do every single chemical reaction. Now, some reactions don't require a workup and an isolation. You can just purify directly. But having those 4 things in means that you never miss something.
Now you're Turing complete in chemistry.
Exactly. And and then I realized later, if I could have on sensors that could read states, I could make the process Turing complete. And this made everyone angry because they're like, you're just making shit up, And I was like, no, what I mean is I need to be formally verifiable.
Yeah.
Because I need it to be reproducible.
Yeah.
And I also need to encrypt it eventually to stop bad actors or people I don't want taking the code,
It's just staggering to think that like chemistry made it this far without somebody trying to solve that. And then, it just looks like caveman to me, the way that they've been doing it. And then, the people who are arguing with you must just have never understood the paradigm that computers are built in. Like,
exactly.
It just makes, they understand, maybe they know how to code, but they didn't internalize like why it is this way.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, the chemists are great. But I think that, and to be fair, I just like making people angry.
I get it. I know. Yeah.
Like
You don't come in and make it easy for them to like it.
Yeah. I don't regret anything, but there might be a way where I could, developed a little bit, I don't know, charm or charisma or something.
I think it's very unlikely, but you could hire someone who's good at that.
But so what I realized, so they were, chemists are busy discovering the reactions and making sure that the molecule's clean and things happen with specificity. Chemists are really beautiful at saying, oh, you've given me a problem. So what chemists are fantastic at is they are the ultimate craftspeople, right? And so it's a bit like going to a Michelin star chef or your favorite painter and saying, oh, we'll just roboticize all that, away with you. Right. And the artist would say, hang on, but here's the difference. The artist is creating a unique object that, people will appreciate from an aesthetic point of view, where the chemist is normally just trying to make a molecule that they need to make for a drug discovery project or for manufacturing.
Right.
And so there's kind of a bit of that. So the chemistry is a really interesting culture. But once I thought, I know what the primitive unit operations are, the next thing I did 2 other things, and which will come back to computation and computer in a moment, which I will obviously say are genius.
Of course.
But not, because I have no genius in me at all.
Someday somebody else can say that.
But I made 2 decisions which were inspired by my wish to design my own computer. I designed my first computer using about 100 layers of tracing paper on an A3 site on a sheet. And I basically built the shift register and the memory and the counters, and it was all moving. It was moronic, right? I was like ones and zeros and overlay. Oh, carry. Oh, do this. I made it like basically a rudimentary adder.
Yeah.
I think I was like 9
this
or something.
is how chips are designed in Excel.
Yeah.
These days. I mean, don't quote me on that. Like some chip designs can be played with that way.
Yeah. And so that was kind of, I always had that in my head. So in the chemistry lab, there's this big field of digital chemistry, or what I would call proto-digital chemistry, where everyone said, oh, chemistry is digitized already. And I was like, what? And what they meant is they were doing flow chemistry. And for flow chemistry, you have to control the velocity. You have to control stirring. It's very good for scaling up. It's very good for basically controlling manufacturing processes. But it was very niche because it's almost like an analog computer. Like one flow machine would do one reaction for one particular molecule. And every time you wanted to make a different molecule, you'd have to reconfigure everything.
Okay.
So I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to do what's called batch. And I was like, if I'm going to make a state machine, a finite state machine, batch is good because I'm like, I have my head, it's like in a Turing machine. I have a lookup table, I have a head, move, read, keep going, read out. And if the round bottom flask was literally my finite state machine was like, turn round bottom flask on by adding reagents, turn it off by workup, and go through these steps.
Cool.
Suddenly my finite state machine that was programmable in my description language, suddenly everything was starting to come together because I could describe the setup using a graph.
Yeah.
So now suddenly I've got a graph of all the objects and the addresses. They all had IP addresses.
Yeah.
I used to go crazy at my team when they were like plugging things into USB hubs because they would always fail. And they used to hide the USB hubs in the fume hood underneath a metal plate. Because what I did to drive it is I designed my own pumps and valves.
Okay.
And I made them power over Ethernet. I did this myself. Huh. And then my team then took it forward and then made it better.
Okay.
In the specification. And why power over Ethernet? Because I had this obsession with one, I want to draw a graph. You don't have two. When you go from an, you don't have.
Okay. You want it to look like the graph.
Two edges. I wanted it to be like that.
Okay.
And I was just obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And they made it work.
Wow.
So we have, had a PoE router switch, plug them in.
The pumps got enough power to operate this way?
Yeah. I mean, it was
okay,
good.
So just to orient you, what's the state of the art for you guys now? You've been making computers. I saw a bunch of them at your lab. They do the 4 different operations that you described. And then, do they end up with different inputs for each of them, or do they have a library of 256 inputs and you can, what's that look like going forward? Do you really end up in a position where you could make any drug anytime, or any chemical anytime, or do you need to kind of plan ahead, or what's this look like?
Yeah,
where does this go?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
At the moment, you play. Actually,
so where are we at now?
Where we are right now, I'll add one bit. So I've discussed all the framework for computer. So computer is a robot. You add in chemicals, you add in code, and it does that and all the graph. The process of doing it is computation. So computation is to chemistry what computation is to mathematics. So awesome. But let's put that to one side. So right now, the most important thing is that the robot shouldn't have to be reconfigured at all. Put in new code. You put in, you go to your robot and say, I want to make this new molecule. Completely new molecule. So what you should be able to do in principle is put in the code to make the molecule, the KDL file, and then it will tell you what reagents you have to add. So you have to go and get the reagents. Now in this case,
you buy them online.
You buy them
Amazon,
online.
You plug them in.
Almost, but from a chemical supplier. And then you plug them in.
Comes in a toner cartridge.
And the reaction will happen. Now, because chemists are doing lots of different types of chemistry, you could have thousands of different reagents.
Okay.
And one of the things I was speculating at, I was asking this question actually with Google. They gave me a grant many years ago. They were like, again, survival kit. I'm like on a desert island on the moon. What is the minimum number of reagents I need to basically make an anti-inflammatory, an antibiotic, a pain med, an antiviral? So what is, so could I have minimum building blocks I could put into the computer and just produce n different molecules? And that's actually a very hard problem. But I figured with about 25 to 50 inputs, I could probably cover most of that. I could probably make all the meds you needed.
Oh.
Now, the argument would be, well, if you're going to the moon, why not just take them, right?
Yeah,
And I'm
why
like,
not?
well, zero mass payload, because when you want a new problem, you could have a computer on Earth, check something, check the configuration, and then you can use your fixed reagents to do other things. You're not limited by what the dose, what you've taken. So the status right now is, in the research lab at least, there's lots of different reagents people do, but there's a lot of convergence happening as well. And I have not really mandated that the team, and I wouldn't even, when I mandate something, everyone just goes, that's a cool idea. Do you really want to do that?
You're not the effective dictator that you imagine.
So no, I mean, I think it's very collaborative. It's kind of good fun.
Yeah.
But there is a code. If I say something once and it's the team don't want to do it, they just ignore it. If I say it twice, they're like, we better start planning.
Yeah.
And if I say it 3 times, then we go and do it. Okay. And if it's safe and if it looks fun. But so the number of reagents can be typically quite large.
Okay.
But now in chemistry, there's this thing that you can do. Take a molecule, you can cut it up in little bits. So the analogy I would have is like if you're building a massive Lego city, let's say the apartment blocks are kind of interchangeable and things like that, and subways and so on. You could just have pre-made subways, right? Pre-made bits. But that could be quite a lot of bits. But then if you break them down, you can break them down into common building blocks. A door frame, a door, a window.
Yeah.
Now, same in chemistry. If you go back in chemical space far enough, you can get back to carbon, nitrogen, oxygen.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying you start with pile of elements, but as per our discussion yesterday, we should put in lunar regolith. The regolith of drugs has to be a crazy project.
This has to get done.
So what you do is you can reduce the number of reagents, but you increase the number of steps.
Okay.
And therefore the amount of time.
I see.
So it's a trade-off between depth and chemical space, and you lose yield every time you do a reaction because you don't get 100% yield.
Yeah.
So even you get 99% yield, it doesn't take that many steps before you're down to quite a large loss.
So if I download the plans for a rep, make it, start hacking on it, I can end up with a computer. And then I can, print ibuprofen and Adderall and whatever else I feel like getting on at home.
Yep.
And all I need is a chemical supplier that's willing to sell me reagents. Do you think that, where does this go? I mean, do I end up with a computer next to my Mr. Coffee or my Nespresso that just prints my drugs in the morning and I dump them in a smoothie? Or does this end up being an industrial thing? Or is this just for researchers and labs? Where do you think this goes?
So we can segue into Chemify and the other stuff, but the answer to that question is I am very bad at predicting anything.
Okay.
And I think we all are.
All right.
But I would say I don't see you having a computer in your house anytime soon. Maybe the pharmacy formulation.
Okay.
Maybe there might be, I would like more distributed manufacturing.
Okay.
So could every town have a pharmaceutical factory that's just making stuff locally?
Yeah.
Sure.
And what would be, so if I imagine that for a minute, if I go in a pharmacy, I can see they got like shelves of bottles of stuff. And it seems like mostly what they're doing is, it's like, okay, you got this prescription, 30 milligrams, 10 tablets. They stick them in a bottle and that's the basic job. They're not making drugs, but you could get rid of all those. Well, you'd get rid of all those bottles, but you'd replace them with bottles of reagents that are needed to make everything in a pharmacy. I mean, if you had to guess, is that like thousands or hundreds? I mean, what order of magnitude are we talking about for the different inputs to make a pharmacy?
To make a factory that would be making virtually any drug that the local community would need, I reckon I'm just guessing, right? I would say several thousand different chemicals.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be but relatively limited volumes. But here's a nice thing. It's a bit like, Chemify in a way is kind of very going to be like the AWS for chemistry.
Yeah.
Or the AMS, Advanced Molecular Services. You can imagine having facilities all around the world, and it then becomes a logistics problem. Say, hey, I need this molecule tomorrow. So if you're a patient and it's a drug, fine. Next, make sure it's all FDA regulated. But let's just talk about chemistry and discovery, because that's what Chemify is going to doing a lot of, is drug discovery and helping companies develop new medicines. And that process requires a lot of chemistry that right now typically occurs in China by hand or in India.
Brute force with labor.
Brute force. And so you're very supply chain dependent.
Okay.
But if suddenly you've got lots of different factories all around the world and they've got different reagents in stock, you could say it's a bit of like a route finding problem. Say, oh, I'd like molecule A tomorrow. Typically molecule A, if you've got all the gold standard reagents in store, would be just one step, right? A few hours. But let's say you don't have the reagents in store. So you have to make the reagents to make the reagents to make the reagents. So, but I've got,
I see.
Now it would take me, to make molecule A, you have to get the reagents in for A. That would take 1 week. But however, the reagents for A, let's call it small a.
Yeah.
I've got the reagents for them and it only takes 1 day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll just dial it and queue it up and I'll make the reagent for the reagent today.
Yeah,
but
if you are at AWS for chemistry, then you get an economy of scale and you can have thousands of reagents in stock. I mean,
and you move them around.
You just put this machine in the back of the chemical supplier warehouse. I mean,
yeah, and then so not only that, but different factories will load balance.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And maybe there'll be regulations for how much solvent you emit. So we're going to do, Chemify is going to make factories. We're going to put some factories in the US, in Switzerland, obviously in the UK, Singapore if we can.
Yeah.
But in Switzerland, doing chemistry, the local, and it will be the same in the US and no doubt in the UK.
Yeah.
If when you're making the chemicals, if you emit organic solvent in the atmosphere, you get fined. You have to recycle it.
Okay.
So Chemify factories will be able to load balance, recycle heat, recycle solvent, and it just becomes a massive, engineering problem.
Okay.
It's actually Chemify is just a logistics solver.
At some point, what's the process for recycling the solvents?
So there's lots of different ways you could do it. So chemists typically, a lot of chemists, well, a lot of processes now, it's just easier to just throw the solvents away and they're disposed of.
Yeah.
But if you had a system where you could filter them, you could pass them through some activated filter that could remove, say, if they're contaminated with water, with other things. And what you could do if you really want to purify them is you could distill them.
Yeah.
And so you heat them up until they boil and you do fractional distillation depending on how messed up the mixture is.
Okay.
And so in principle, you should be able to recycle everything. And the nice thing is, if you know what your you know your code, you know what your solvent is, you already ahead of time know how messed up that is. So you can start to then pick reactions that don't produce many byproducts.
Well, and you could probably also just have have some library that just automatically optimizes the recycling plan for the solvents that are emitted from this process. I mean, you can basically.
And I think the nice thing
there's this idea, I don't know if you know about it, called reversible computing, which is an ancient idea that's never been built, but is considered ultimately necessary, because what you're doing is every time you flip a transistor, you're using energy to do that. And so what we do now is, like, when we want to set it back to zero or whatever, we waste that energy. But in reversible computing, you would kind of hang on to that value and then play it backwards when you need it to go the other way. And so there's like this, so you end up with a dramatic energy savings, and someday we'll make chips this way. But you could imagine, like, if Chemify goes forward, because you have everything in KDL, you could sort of say, okay, I'm going to go through these steps to make this thing. These are going to be this output I want. All these other outputs are things I don't want. Now go architect a way to tear them apart and recycle them. And you could get that for free, or not free, but you would have that automated with every.
I mean, the KDLs, that's quite right. I agree. The KDLs almost, for me, the analogy is like they're like train track.
Yeah.
You're building knowledge in chemical space, how to go from A to B. Yeah. And once you encode that knowledge explicitly, it ain't going away.
Yeah.
It's there forever.
Yeah. So you end up with this giant GitHub for chemistry.
Yeah. And people can version it and so on.
Cool.
And I think this infrastructure, I mean, the thing that excites me is that, it's actually going to work.
Yeah.
And it's going to be around long after I've gone.
Yeah. Cool.
And that's kind of interesting.
Cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We all hope to do that. Is there okay, so just to wrap that up, you got the company going into production to make these factories now. And then the first users will probably be people trying to do drug design more than anything. Yep. And then is there some point where you think presuming they design a drug, do you think you'll also produce it for the market, or is that? beyond what makes
So
sense.
I'll tell you the master plan. So right now we're building the factory that is an audition to build the factory.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny being here because I was asking. So we've got the lab versions and we've got all the production line in there.
Yeah.
But actually putting into a facility and starting to game that out is quite good because you always want to. There's two important questions: what's the cost and what's the capacity?
Yeah.
And the answer is the cost is decreasing.
Yeah.
And the capacity is increasing.
On what scale? That's the question.
And that's literally the $100 million question.
So you don't have to answer that today, but presumably you build factory one, and you start to assign real numbers to these things.
Oh yeah, we've got the numbers.
Cool.
But now the idea is to start with. Really, what Chemify is doing is we're making, we're mining, and we're discovering. And what do I mean by that? Well, for me, a real discovery of a molecule. If you draw a molecule in a computer, and then you make it it's not real until you make it in a computer.
Yeah.
Now, one day we'll know so much about chemical space.
Okay.
The molecular representation will be able to put through some AI,
Yeah.
and it will tell us for sure what it does and everything, and it'll be almost as good as having the molecule.
Okay.
We are so far away from that. Now, Chemify is going to help make that happen. So here's what we do. Stage one is that we're just going to do drug discovery with partners, and the pain point we're going to address is we're just going to be faster.
Yeah.
And we're going to basically combine realizable AI. Because we have the programming language, we know what we can make. We only design molecules that we have routes for.
Okay.
So it's a bit like going to Google Maps and say, I want to go from A to B, and
I
it
want
will
to drive to Australia.
and it'll say, there's no roads.
Yeah.
Like, good luck with that.
So if this is set up properly, because there's any number of companies that think they can do drug discovery using AIs and all these other things. So you're not necessarily focused on that part. You want to be the one that they call when they want to actually make this thing they discovered that they think is useful.
So we do co-discovery with them, because the thing is, the company comes, they typically say, we have we have a way of, we have an assay for the drug, or we've got a rough requirement. Sometimes they come with a molecule and say, can you make this molecule? And we're like, sure, we can do that. But we should make it a little better first. Let's make these ones.
Let's make it more manufacturable.
Yeah, it's a bit like, these aren't the droids you're looking for.
It's like anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go to the people who actually make stuff, and they're like, nice try, but let me just make that better for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's our first model. Then let's say we can then, because that's unreliable, then when the drug company wants to scale up a bit to go through trials and things like that, and also they then have to start going from GLP to GMP.
What does that mean?
So good laboratory protocol is about a certification scale for the kind of certification you have to have in the audit trails and all that. Now, GMP is another level. So the FDA can say, what is the contaminants, what is the reliability and all this stuff. But if we're building computers and the modules are all identical, and the KDL's been refined over thousands of hours,
easy audit.
We'll become GMP.
Great. You'll become the gold standard.
By default.
Yeah.
And then people go, but what about scale up? But because they do it at the bench scale, which is between, say, I don't know, few milligrams to tens of grams.
Yeah.
And they want to say, well, you can only make 10 grams. I'm like, well, how many do you need? We need 100. That's fine. There's 10 machines running 10 threads.
Think you make more machines before you make them bigger?
Yeah, we're gonna make thousands of machines.
I see.
The cost of the machines is just going.
Yeah, and it makes more sense to make them so you can keep them busy.
Yeah.
Okay, so then if I project out 10 years, 20 years, we should be at a point where, nobody makes drugs any other way. They design them in their, whatever CAD program. They upload them to GitHub. You download them, you print them, they test them, you mail them back and forth in FedEx a few times. Once it's done, the FDA rubber stamps it, and you start making millions of them, sending them to every pharmacy. And then at some point, you're like, this is dumb. Let's just start sending the printers to pharmacies, and then they just print them on site.
Yeah.
And then after that, I get my Mr. Chemistry next to my Nespresso.
Yeah.
And in the morning, it just prints my drugs, sticks them in a smoothie, and I'm good to go.
I mean, in the future, in 100 years, maybe even better than that, drugs right now are meant to treat disease. It might be that intervening chemically, we'll know so much about when we're turning into a disease.
Right.
We'll just be able to manufacture small molecular modifications, nucleic acids, things like that,
right.
RNA, and say, you're going to get ill in a few weeks. Let's not let that happen. Here's a personalized medication
I was thinking,
to prevent that from happening.
Recently, like fixing American healthcare is just like completely lost cause. But I realized we don't have to, because if we just cure all the diseases that people rely on the healthcare system for, then we won't need it except for like gunshot wounds. And so we can really just have this beautiful future where we don't actually have to fix this intractably fucked up industry. We can just make it obsolete. And I think you're right. Like, well, not only the chemistry might be or using drugs to treat these things might just be a stopgap measure until we can start to architect the proteins that you need and architect the, genetic modifications that you need in order to be healthy in the way that you want.
And then one of the things that will happen also, and ultimately, Chemify, I mean, I'm saying this flippantly, ideally, if someone just gave me, I don't know, $100 billion and say, hey, actually, we don't want to make a new AI model next year. We want to solve chemistry.
Yeah.
Here's $100 billion. And all I would do is I would basically make many football pitches worth of computers.
Yeah.
And I would take all the reagents that exist in the world,
Brute force it.
And all the reactions and brute force it, because there's a finite but large number of reagents, finite but large number of reactions, do them all. And then...
And what's cool is you only have to do each one once. That goes back into, the results go back into the computer simulations, and then we can start. You basically, if you did all that, you do it all one time, kind of like training in a giant LLM. You do it one time, and then you can use it a million times. And so you do it one time, learn what every reaction does, then you would put that back into a giant simulation. Now we could actually start to simulate these things.
Yeah,
right now we can't simulate things because we've never done them.
So now one of the things that's going to happen, which is kind of interesting, is we're going to have a Moore's law number of molecules. So Moore's law, doubling of transistors in a chip every 18 months.
Yeah.
Roughly, it was an economic law, actually.
It's totally a fake thing we made up.
But if you now think about what are the number of molecules makeable by the human race right now, if the computer and Chemify and academia and chemistry could basically start to double the number of molecules every year that we could make.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be work for chemists doing manual chemistry.
Got it.
Because they're going to be at the frontiers doing like the really intricate
We
stuff.
can't double the number of chemists, but we can double, and this is a big part of why the computer is so important. You keep building those, we can start to double the number of molecules we make every year.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And then collectively, they're all contributing to this giant knowledge base of what they're good for.
And then you'll get to the point right now. I mean, ARM, I think, they don't really manufacture processors anymore.
Yeah.
They design them using their architecture. They have such good kind of simulators, and they know they're going to get the performance when it's fabbed. And I could imagine having a futures in molecules. Because there's more molecules possible than there are like atoms in the universe. Yeah. Right? Like the number of molecules is just ginormous. Yeah. So you could say, I'm going to pick these molecules. Mm-hmm. I'll work out what they do in silico, and I'll see if they're computable. Yeah. And if they're computable, I'll put them on the list.
Does the computer have like a mass spectrum on the backside or something so it can see what it did?
So the computer, the ones in the Cronin lab are very high spec and kind of decadent there's an NMR machine and a mass spec and infrared. And so there's lots on there. In Chemify, we've developed techniques for getting that type of data, but more cheaply. Okay. Particularly because if you're doing a reaction again and again, and it's exactly the same chemicals in and out, so you can use other methods to determine if it's worked or not, much cheaper. All right. But in the discovery bots, they're at the cutting edge, so you need all these advanced assays. Okay. And that's quite nice because you can discover. Now you can say, you're a chemist, discover me a new molecule. They were like, what? What do you mean discover your new molecule? It's like, just make something new. Go on. And you're like, sure. What? Yeah. It's like, do I just I did this years ago for fun. I published this paper in 2018, and the conceit for the paper was this: student goes to the lab blindfolded, goes to the cupboard, picks out chemicals at random, no more than 4. Takes a couple of grams of each in solvents, they dissolve, and mix them up and shove them in, see what happens. Anything new. And my group were like, what? I was like, that's such a cool idea. And there was like safety issues. So what we did is we double blinded it. Okay. But the safety officer checked. Right. So we picked them at random. All right. And then but then the safety officer went and checked and said, okay, you're not adding a reductant to an oxidant, it's not going to explode. Okay, this is not going to produce a nerve agent. so we could have the rough
Okay.
parameters.
Yeah, great.
And we did it, and we discovered new chemistry.
That's super cool. And you can program all that into KDL. Like you
Yeah.
can basically just have like
The design of experiments,
a-
expand it out.
a code checker that like, okay, cool. Different track here. Another very unique thing about you is that you somehow got legitimized in academia, became a professor, got a lab, did a bunch of research, and then raised money to spin out this company. And we have a lot of problems with figuring out how to navigate that just in general. And I don't blame anybody in particular, but that most academic environments are not very well suited to spinning things out. Lots of people who spent their career in academia really don't have a very deep understanding of like how we do startups and those things, and that might not be interesting to them. And so trying to get more things out of labs and into startups and therefore into the world is very interesting to me. And so I'm curious, for you, do you attribute that to like being in Scotland, not knowing any better, like having weird support from the university you're at, or just being bullheaded, or like what's the thing that kind of makes it appealing or practical, or how did you, get on this track and get so far?
Well, one of the motivations for Chemify was to build a technology to search chemical space.
Yeah.
On one side, discover drugs for people, make manufacturing routes and all that. On the other hand, build me an infrastructure so I can discover origin of life.
Okay.
That was kind of that's the reason,
Yeah.
right? And I tried this many times. I started a company before, and the university helped me, and I started the company. And I won't go into too much detail here because it's
That's good.
sagas are sagas, right? but I, in good faith, started the company. I worked with the company to digitize chemistry. The company's built a very interesting product to collect data.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But I didn't have any executive control.
Okay.
I advised them. I sat on the board. I interacted with them. It was great fun, and we raised money in the UK. We did it through the university system, and that was fine.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the level of ambition that I had for the digitization of chemistry to make a robot,
Yeah.
I could see the company, the way it was set up. There was no way we were going to get enough capital behind it.
Yeah.
And also, to be fair to the people who did the company,
Yeah.
they've got this crazy professor who can't organize his way out of a brown
Okay.
paper bag,
Yeah.
saying we're going to raise $1 billion and
Yeah.
we're going to build this so we're going to get this fictitiously large amount of money and build this fictitious robot that
Yeah.
no one understands and probably won't ever work, and it's going to be cool.
Okay.
And so they were kind of like, no,
Yeah.
no, we'll do this other thing, and it's a hard market. And so when I stepped off the board of the company, the thing I told the company
Mhm.
I was going to do,
Yeah.
because I had the research project had already started in 2012, right? So it was clear what I was going to do. I had all these grants, and the company kind of said to me, and again, there's reasons I can't go into
That's
too much
okay.
detail, but bottom line is they didn't believe
Yeah.
the computer was possible, and
Right.
quite rightly,
Right, fair enough.
And also I felt this in academia. I felt frustration because people tend to publish papers and run away from the idea.
Yeah.
Build on it. And I wanted to build the infrastructure. So I started, and I'm pretty good at building teams. And one of the things I realized, so my company was doing its thing. Great. Then from 2012 to 2015, I built the first kind of prototype computer. Then by 2018, I published the first paper that showed it all worked. Everyone went, and then I published another paper after. And then I think I was thinking, this really works.
Yeah.
DARPA had given me a load of money.
Yeah.
For this, the EPSRC, the UK's NSF, had given me a load of money. I was like, oh my God, I built pumps and valves, I've got graphs, the modules work, it really works.
Yeah.
And I think that was when I was like in kind of what I didn't even know the term spin out mode. It's like,
Yeah.
I've got an idea, got a technology. I think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to save time.
Sure.
There might be a business case. So then I started to go around. So I left the board of my company on good terms. Everyone was fine. I then waited a few months, thought about whether I was allowed to do it,
Okay.
checked that I was, and then I started looking for a CEO.
Yeah.
And I met an amazing woman who I knew, who's a kind of aspiring digital chemist. She was a chemist, innovator, had just done an MBA, and I was like, you're the perfect to be the CEO.
Yeah.
And then she said, I won't tell you who she is because I think I don't want to spare her blushes. But she told me she wanted this ludicrous salary. She wanted FU money.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to give you that, but I don't have any money.
Yeah.
And she was like, what? So what are you trying to do? And then I realized the penny dropped. It's like there was only one CEO for the company, and it was me. So I was like, shit, but I want to solve origin of life, and I'm a chemistry professor who can't organize anything except their team for doing chemistry things. So I went to university and said, look, I think I can make this work.
Yeah.
What do you think? We'd have to do it the Valley way. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, let's talk about equity.
Yeah.
And let's talk about IP.
Yeah.
And so, and I said, look, let's make it work.
Yeah.
Let's make $1 billion company in Glasgow and then not make it a one-off. Let's just repeat. And the university were like, you know what? You've been saying this for so long. You haven't deviated from the path.
Right.
You've raised money. You've got PhD students. Sure. If you think you can cope with it, we'll support you.
Great.
What do you need?
Great.
And at the same time, I was moving out of the chemistry department into a new building on campus. And the top floor was dedicated for digital chemistry. And I was going to hire the university was going to hire some other academics to go there. But I was like, so the university, can I raise money, put my spin-out company there? And they were like, maybe. Let's just check. And they did all the policies, and they checked to make sure it was legal and above board tax stuff. And as a pandemic ended, so I also during the pandemic, I stockpiled people. I hired people who were interested in Chemify, but I couldn't start it. I had no money. And said, come and work on these grants and prepare. And they were like, that's cool. And then we stockpiled some of the hardware because there were supply chain issues. They were like, that's cool. And then and we moved into the building in 2022. Yeah. And I got the seed money raised at the end of 21, beginning of 22. First employee came at Chemify in March 2022. And then I transferred all the tech in, the university with support. We got the employees. And then in about June, I invented my first molecule by going from quantum design to KDL, and I ran on the robot, and we made the dye, made the dye that we invented, and it works. And I was like,
great.
Shit.
Yeah.
I need more money.
Yeah.
This amount of money isn't enough. And then this stupid thing happened in February where somebody invaded another country.
Oh, yeah.
And then the market was already beginning to drop, and it just went, and investor confidence went, boom. Interest rates were going up, and I didn't know anything about this. I was just saying to people, give me money, give me money, give me money. And everyone was like,
we don't give money right now.
We don't. We kind of, we love you, but we hate you. We love you. We hate. No, we're not. No, we hate you. We love you, but we
can't deploy money.
And every time interest rates went up, I felt, and when I twigged that was what was happening, I felt I was being stabbed in the eye more and more. Yeah. As the Fed was raising rates.
Tough time to raise money.
But I raised my Series A in October 2022. Wow. Where I got my leads. I crystallized, got term sheets. And it was so painful because I'm like, no one wants to give me any money. Yeah. And I'm like, and everyone's like, yeah, you're a professor, you're in Scotland, you're kind of a bit weird. We don't know if you're making shit up. And I was like, and no one would leap. I felt like there were a bunch of penguins looking over a hole and wanting, or was it seal? I don't know whichever way of the analogy anyway. But there was couple of angels invested, and one of them, was a CEO, a guy called Jeff Huber, was the CEO of Grail and ex-Googler. And Jeff actually helped me correct my term sheet for the first one because the term sheet was all wrong for my seed. And I was like, and he helped me. Yeah. And then because I listened to him, he said, can I put in some money? I was like, you want to give me money? You? Sure. And I was like, wow, this cool guy, he's quite smart, wants to give me money.
Great.
And he said, yeah, my friend too. And I said, okay. So so I fitted everyone into the seed, and I had, Founders Fund coming in and DCVC, and then, there's quite a lot of people in, and Blue Yard led the round.
Good.
And then it turned out that the two guys I let in who helped me, and the one started their own fund called Triatomic.
Yeah. And
they were like, and then they were the one that led the Series A. And they were trying to raise money at the same time. I think that they don't mind me saying, they were trying to raise their fund at the same time I was trying to raise my Series A.
That's pretty normal.
My pain and their pain were kind of in sync.
Yeah. It's actually, that is one of the things I think founders often totally get wrong, is they don't understand the business model of VCs. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that VCs don't just have a pile of money in the bank. They're raising money. They're at different stages with that. They're calling capital. They're at different stages with that. And they may or may not be able to make an investment. And they have a bunch of other constraints around their thesis and the stage and all that stuff. And you just don't know. So you can't expect to get very far if you're just banging on doors, because A VC will tell you no, and it has nothing to do with you or your idea or anything. You're just not a match for them with a whole bunch of constraints that are not conveyed to you. So don't take it personally. Just
and I learned a lot in that. And then going through the seed, so from the seed, I knew technology worked, and I was also paranoid, and so there were people, there were all these investors out there, and I met a lot of them. I met the guys at DCVC, awesome, kind of really pushy. Kostler, awesome, really pushy, A16Z and all this, and they were all like, really pushy, but really, And then I was trying to get references on the VCs, and I was like, some VCs got really bad write-ups, and some VCs got really good write-ups, and then I switched over, and I was like, let me do another graph, and I basically looked at the bad write-up versus status of the company, and I was like, the companies that go bad, the relationship can go bad.
Yeah.
So the number one learning, I'm like, if I'm going to take money from a VC, I better make sure, even if they're your best friend, because they're not your best friend.
Sure.
They don't have to be. They're investors.
They can't be.
You've got to not fuck it up.
Yeah.
Or you've got to think ahead so you don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
And so the thing I like about the Triatomic, Steve and Jeff and Peter, is they're really collaborative.
Good.
They're super excited. They know how hard it is. I mean, Jeff raised the money for Grail.
Yeah.
I think he raised hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars for Grail. And so when I was understanding that, but the thing was really interesting because Steve and Jeff are like, we know their thesis is century-defining technologies. And what is Chemify if not that? Yeah. But then there's this little problem going from seed to Series A. It's like, what are you actually going to do to make money? And I was like, and I went through.
Yeah. Turns out at some point somebody will ask you that.
Yeah.
It's almost predictable.
And then I was learning, I was like, I know what a startup is. I know what a spin. I was like, I'm so stupid because I was like, obviously a spin out is a technology that probably doesn't have a market. You just take it out because it's technology, it's cool. And a startup is someone who's got an idea of a market but no technology.
Right. There
so
you
I'm
go.
There you go.
That's exactly the difference between.
And I'm like, okay, so I've got my technology. I need to turn this into a startup. I need to identify a market that people will pay.
Yeah.
And to cut a long story short, are we a hardware play? Well, selling hardware is too hard at this time. Hardware's not going to work, all this stuff. Are we a software play? Well, who's going to buy the software and who's going to do this, that, and the other? Chemistry is complicated.
Yeah.
And then I realized
selling drugs.
Chemify is making stuff and we're making the best stuff faster, designing it, and and then suddenly I realized there's a market.
Yeah.
And so, and there's pull in that market. Now the only resistance now, so we're not in the valley of death now.
Yeah.
We're just in the valley of disbelief because no one believes the technology works.
Well, they don't need to once you're shipping their molecules.
So that's the thing. So
that'll solve itself.
We've got two partnerships underway right now.
Yeah.
And I think another 5 coming. Good. And the first partnership we did, it's announced, so I'm not saying anything controversial. We did with DuPont Therapeutics and based in Boston. Yeah, okay. DuPont, not DuPont.
Oh, sorry.
And they've got a really interesting technology, drug discovery. And we started working with them. I mean, it's complicated because they've got really great med chemists, really great biologists. And there's me going, yeah, we can do med chem, no problem. They were like, hang on. But the nice thing was, they were very collaborative. We're building the company as you go. He's like, oh, we need that. And we basically, at the beginning, so we're building these robots to do chemistry. And we've got these chemists that came. And when we started the DuPont project, was only 10% of the chemistry that we were doing could go on the robot, and it failed 85% of the time.
Oh.
And I was like,
yeah.
And by the end of the first cycle, we were able to do 50% of all the chemistry. The root managers come out, and we got to 86.9% reliability.
Okay.
And that happened in 3 months.
Okay.
So those 3
Trending
months,
correctly.
Just we're just running around, pants on fire, just making, because this was the difference between academics. You're deploying things that are cool, but they're not robust.
Yeah, I get it.
And so what we did is nah, take that off, redo that, engineer that product. Yeah. And then I understood what a project, I actually understood what a product manager is.
Yeah. It's an expensive thing to learn if you're trying to turn academic scientists into engineers and product developers. I mean, those are disciplines for a reason now.
So, and it's worked. So I think what we have to do now is pretty straightforward. It is about dropping the cost and increasing the speed.
Yeah.
And the other thing is building confidence people we work with, right? Because, can you do all of chemistry in the world right now? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Can you in principle? Absolutely yes.
Yeah.
How'd you get there? Well, basically, you pick a subset of chemistry and you make sure you can do that and expand it. And so, and build confidence with with the partners. So, with the chemistry, so we're doing some organic chemistry,
Okay.
and we've got one project which is an opiate discovery project. And one of the things we're making KDLs for is such a sophisticated molecule. It is made. You can grow it, so you could grow it in a bacteria, I suppose. But what I wanted to do is get access to all those railway tracks and stations, because then I don't have to go to the exact station, but I can make really complex analogs of this molecule.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're going to do, and the NIH gave me some prizes a few years ago on this opiate discovery project, because they saw the potential of the computer to be able to design and discover drugs.
Okay.
And so we're building that. And in my research lab at the same time, we computed a kinase inhibitor for grass that hits the tetramutant. And it seems to be better than the colon cancer drug that's on the market just now.
Wow.
And we were like, what?
Cool.
I mean,
so you'll probably end up with a lot of these stories going forward.
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah.
But our main, so this is the main thing, right? The problem is we have to improve the technology and drop the cost and not run out of money.
Okay.
And we have to have people that are willing to pay us,
Yeah.
right? Because we're in a real world.
Yeah.
We're not in the world,
Yeah.
pre-2022. So basically there's this infinitely thin landing strip. So I've got Chemify, which is this kind of broken aeroplane, no landing gear, no radar.
Yeah.
And we're like, do we have enough money to build a radar? Can you see it? Like, yeah, all right, we don't expect. Do we need landing gear? Definitely. Okay, we'll build landing gear. How much money do you have left? How much fuel do you have left? So there's this multifaceted equation where you're
get it.
looking at your burn rate,
right,
looking at your build rate. It's insane. I mean, I'm just hiring good people and trying to get them. So if anyone, is interested in joining us and who's watching this.
Always wanted to go to Scotland.
You only have to, it's great in Scotland.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. There's lots of hill walking. There's lots of whiskey. There's lots of cool stuff happening. Yeah. But you're not going to have time because you're going to be building $1 billion company. So who cares where you are?
Exactly. I love it.
I'll supply free sunshine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Scotland's known for its sunshine.
Well, it will be fake sunshine, right?
Okay.
But,
indoor sunshine.
That's the other thing I say to people about Chemify. I said, Chemify, we're vaporware. And they're like, what? I'm like, we have programmable vaporware. We can program the partial pressure to evaporate the solvent.
Oh, wow. Cool. So what else is exciting to you? What's like the craziest thing on your mind that you're thinking about? I know you got this origin of life obsession. I don't totally understand that. What are the other ideas that you think?
The one that's relevant to Chemify.
If you weren't stuck busy, well, even if you weren't doing Chemify, what do you think you'd want to do? What are the?
So there are two things. So one of the origin of life algorithms we've been writing was a new way of looking at chemical space.
Okay.
But I realized that we can use, if you think about how evolution works. So and look at plant-based evolution, a lot of drugs come from plants.
Yeah.
And these are natural products. They're produced in the plant by accident and sometimes by evolutionary necessity.
Yeah.
Poisons to the ward off, or they have. And I'm thinking, what happens to this plant? What is this plant going to be making in 1 billion years? It's a really good question. Because if you take the protein, if you look at the proteins, how the protein is going to evolve, you can start to figure out how the molecules will change. So now I've worked out a way of constraining the space of molecules that's likely to be made in 1 billion years.
Right.
Using assembly theory.
Right.
And I encoded that. So actually we've got a drug discovery platform that I put into Chemify based on this. Now, the way some people do some drug discovery is how do you search chemical space, where you can do fragment-based drug discovery, you have a starting point, you combine them together, measure against some metric and make it. But if you already know roughly what the cell is doing,
wow,
and you trace it so that's pretty crazy.
Wow.
And I'm also the CSO for Chemify. So I think I will hire a CSO at some point.
What does CSO mean?
Chief Science Officer.
Yeah.
All right, because one of the big benefits about being a CEO and also being an academic, right, is, investors had to get their head around that, full-time CEO doing academia. How does that work?
Yeah.
Well, literally how it works right now is I have a well-declared conflicts of interest policy.
Yeah.
So the university knows what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And Chemify knows what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And everyone knows who owns what.
Yeah.
And we keep it super,
good,
transparent.
amazing.
And I'm such a data obsessive. Like one of the first things I did when we set up the company, quite rightly, is Chemify had its own independent data system. No touch any university systems at all. all the university did is provided us power and fumes.
Mhm.
But going the crazy thing, the other crazy thing is so there's only 4 problems I want to solve, and they're all related to why we're here. And the first one is what origin of life? How did the origin of life come about? Then there's the jump to intelligence and abstraction,
Yeah.
and then there is consciousness, and then there is like general intelligence.
Okay.
And I want to solve all those problems. I think they're all related. I think they're all the same problem. And of course, I mean, there's great competitors out there, like, the folks at DeepMind are doing amazing stuff. And, Demis Habbasipis' stated goal is to solve intelligence.
Yeah.
I think people at Meta, Jan LeCun, they want to solve intelligence as well, and all these other companies. But I'm taking a slightly different approach. I think that people will solve something that they call intelligent, and that's great. I don't want to make it a kind of competition about that, because what I'm suggesting is something a bit unique, is that selection produced cognition to do one thing, to aid survival. And consciousness is a really interesting thing. And the craziest idea I have right now, which is totally wrong, and I know I get told off, but I'll tell you, ask me, and I think that the brain is definitely, might be, I don't know, hypothesis. Brain is an analog computer with digital error correction.
Where do you observe digital error correction?
So the neurons are firing, so you have on and off.
Yeah.
But the networks that are making, the information processing isn't just these massive firing events. The compute is also happening in the rewiring of the network.
Okay.
And this network these are not coefficients.
Yeah.
In a highly deep neural network. These are physical wires.
Yeah. Okay.
Moving around.
All right.
Okay. So the space that can encode is like literally mind blowing.
Yeah.
And is responsible probably for creativity. So one of the things I thought about doing for fun is, like, if I wasn't doing Chemify, I'd make a chemical brain.
Okay.
And I'd try and make it conscious. And or rather than conscious, I probably wouldn't want to make it. I'd try to make it to do things that are really creative. So I keep having arguments with people in AI and I say generative AI isn't creative, and everyone gets angry.
Yeah.
And maybe I should state it more precisely.
Yeah.
And you maybe can correct me, because I'm sure you have a much more qualified view on this than me. But I think that if you take an classical AI, as we all know them right now, which is you have a data set and you do things to that data set to make a model, right?
Yes.
And the infrastructure goes into that model, and the algorithms are incredible because you do things there. But in essence, your AI uses that data set and the model, maybe with some external inputs, maybe a user prompting, maybe something else, another model, and then it creates an output.
Yeah.
But you can write that all down, right? That output, you can audit it and say, I can see this call to that process, that call to that database. Oh, and here's how it is. Now, for me, if it creates an output that is not currently in its database, it's new. That's a new thing. That's quite cool. But if you could predict it from that data, it's not that novel.
Right.
And therefore the creativity is a little bit lower. What humans seem to be able to do, and I was given this as a tool earlier, and someone said, I think all of it's like this. And I'm like, and the problem I have with AI and the way that everyone's jumping on the bandwagon is suddenly you see everything through this lens of data in a database, a model, and a prompt.
Yeah.
Now, let's take a hot air balloon. Hot air balloon, there was a moment in time where hot air balloons did not exist and someone thought of them. How they did it? Like, I think the Montgolfier brothers, or one of them was like, there's burning some paper, and then some paper floated up, and he was like,
let's try more.
This paper can fly. And then let's try and make it into an architecture and keep going, trial and error, interact with. And so real creativity requires some curiosity and some embodied interaction in the environment. Could I train an AI to invent a balloon if I had infinite compute and I was combinatorially searching all the space of paper and fire and all that? Sure.
Yeah.
But that's not really in principle possible. Why? Because we misunderstand time and resource and reversible computing.
Yeah.
And so I think people make a lot of statements about, it's possible. And I think I'm a practical individual.
Yeah.
For me, possible needs to be doable. I need to be able to do the experiment.
Sure.
So I think that gets me out of jail, because I think most people go, if you accept that intelligence can be multimodal and all this stuff, I'm just like, but the thing I will go to, and will state on the record, is that superintelligence cannot exist as defined by Nick Bostrom. and it's got us into trouble. But really fast computers that can do really fast stuff that we could never do could exist.
Yeah.
And I've
That's
been
right.
reading a lot of philosophy and thinking a lot, and in particular, I'm inspired by David Deutsch.
Okay.
And the way David Deutsch puts it is like human beings are really good at generating knowledge, fundamental explanations that are hard to vary. Now, there is no magic way. There's nothing magic below knowledge. It's just knowledge. So when people start to talk about the superintelligence, you say, well, what does it look like? I mean, it may be mobilize armies faster than you and invent fusion faster than you, but that's not, it doesn't have access to some reality you do not have access to.
Right.
And a lot of people may argue with that, but I would need to see evidence. Again, I'm an experimental theoretician because I'm too dumb to actually think. I do experiments and I build stuff, hack stuff, and then I'm like, oh, I've got a theory and try like that. So that's...
Look, this is a tough conversation to get too deep in because there's just a lot of semantic pitfalls.
Part 2.
Huh?
Part 2.
Part 2, yeah. Well, it's that, it's a frustrating time because every computer nerd became a philosopher and started, extrapolating, I think often irresponsibly, what the computers will be able to do. A lot of people are psyching themselves out with the LLMs, thinking they see something, but to me, it's basically voodoo, and I don't have a lot of respect for that type of interpretation when people start ascribing creativity to it, when they believe that they're seeing something just because they can't imagine how deep the neural net goes and how it got that answer, makes them start to ascribe intelligence to it and things. And I think that's premature. We do have a pretty good understanding in some sense about how these LLMs work, even if the big deep learning models work, even if we could, it's more data than a human could parse and more complex algorithms than we could ever understand. But we do know in general, like what's going on. And so to me, OpenAI will probably rebrand AI to AGI next year, the way they rebranded ML to AI last year. And so whatever, because it's poorly defined, they'll get away with it. I don't think that's what matters. The notion of creativity is also very poorly defined. Like even if I tell an LLM to paint a picture of an oak tree, it's going to do it because it's seen a million oak trees. And that might not be creative at all. But if I take that and I get inspired and I stick it on the wall and I put a sticky note on it and I draw a little birdhouse on it, well, is that fucking creative?
Yeah.
It's because there's a lot of what matters about creativity is it's something that humans can relate to in some new way. And to me, that's, that's poorly defined. And so I just think it's a lot of dumb arguments. But look, I think you're on the right track. What we need to do is stop being obsessed with deep learning. It's cool, great, we're getting a lot out of it. I understand why people are going nuts with it. We should do that. But we are doing ourselves a major disservice by not also exploring all of these other ideas. And you have very radical and creative and different ideas. And I think that's worth a lot. And so we should do them.
Yeah.
That's exciting to me.
I think my entire life is about...
Which is amazing.
Finding the ground truth.
Sadly, few people like that.
Finding the ground truth for science.
Yeah.
And that's kind of... No worries. So I'll go back to the ground truth.
Yeah.
And cut it. So I want a ground truth. I want to know why I'm here.
Yeah.
I don't want to just be told I'm here.
Yeah.
And I think then that's my motivation. That doesn't mean that these debates are bad, but what I don't like is what really scares me, I'm genuinely concerned about, is the juxtaposition of the doomers and the optimists and the people manipulating. And really what I would like is I just want something very simple out of this technological development. I want all the fruits. That's great. And I'm very happy to pay that what they're doing is awesome, but I want authenticated data. Okay. And ideally I would like authenticated users in a way that doesn't lead to tyranny.
Yeah.
Now, the healthcare systems have a way of doing that, right? Starting to in the UK, but I'm not totally sure. But if you could have authenticated data and authenticated users, and also I would like to hold on to my self, so my image, copyright, my voice, my
a lot of
hair.
people I think feel something like that. And so if we could do that, and I think if we can put those protections in place, the
these self-appointed AI gods, it's kind of like you can see a religion emerging.
Yeah, I know.
And
I know.
I don't do
It's kind of
religions.
sickening. Yeah, I get it.
Do
We've
cults.
been burned by that
I'm
before.
joking.
Totally. Cults are great, especially if they come with free sex.
No.
No.
The computation cult. It just
Yeah,
has
there you go. Exactly. I mean, look, I think these things get out of hand with zealots. I understand that pretty well. I think the opportunity is there for us to architect computer systems much differently.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the toolkits, sometimes still very rudimentary, that we would need to do it. We need to keep track of provenance for where that data came from. We want to know who says it's real data. How was it generated? We don't have that right now. That's metadata that we don't keep track of. And then I think ironically, like the weird thing is people are so up in arms about, like the crypto toolkit, which has been, co-opted by opportunists. But in a lot of ways, the fundamentals of what we need in order to solve these problems for AI is in that toolkit.
Yeah.
So we can actually make AIs that are explainable. That's one class of issues. We can make AIs that keep track of provenance of their data. That's another class of issue. We can authenticate some of these things. We can make AIs that talk to each other in using zero knowledge proofs without exposing too much data. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and that's just going to take time to re-architect a lot of these things. We built we're still using access control mechanisms that were designed for mainframes in the 60s, and they don't even have a notion of having two computers. They literally are isolated to one computer. The access control on your Mac or your PC is basically designed for one computer world. And so, we got to solve all that. And we know how to do it sort of technically. It's just, it's very difficult to re-architect these things with so much momentum, but we get there.
The future of this is going to be really exciting in the next few years. And I think the question is, one of the reasons why I'm saying about academia and industry and building stuff is like, there is no difference between the two for me. Obviously, one of them, I need to not defraud the investors, right? And the other side, I don't want to defraud the taxpayer.
Yeah, right.
But they can work together.
Yeah, cool. Amazing insight. I'm so proud of you for figuring out how to navigate that. I hope that other universities in particular will be inspired to be open to these things, because a lot of times I think that's where the ball stops, and they just haven't seen it done. And so, you may be paving a way for us to get more of these things into the world. That's cool. Well, awesome. Any questions for me?
What questions can I ask you? Yeah. Well, with regards to what I was saying about AI, I mean, do you think that this argument about open sourcing and the moratorium and the way that people are worrying is justified, or is it just posturing by the big tech companies, or what is happening? What should I be worried about as I expect these companies to exist, and I expect these companies to look after my data. Will they?
Well, we're in this difficult moment in time. I mean, I think where I start on this is from a position of believing that it's irresponsible to try to regulate things you don't understand. I know that it's tempting, and we want to imagine all the ways it could go wrong and try and prevent them. And humans just suck at that. We always get it wrong. So I believe you just have to go through this process of discovery. You have to build things, you have to try them, you have to see them fail. You have to recognize what is our actual problem, and then go engineer around that. Sometimes that involves, regulatory constraints and things like that. But you can't do it proactively, and as much as we'd like to. And so I think I have a very, belief that it's irresponsible to call for that, especially when you're calling on inept organizations. They might not be, sinister even, but there's no organization in any government that's like qualified to regulate AI right now. That would be idiotic. It's like trying to ask them to regulate software. They can't even regulate social media, and they have years to have learned to understand that one. So I think it's just really, really, really irresponsible, and it's going to hold us back to try and go call for those kinds of things. So I don't know how to explain the motivations. I do think there's a regulatory capture argument that even if that wasn't the motivation behind some of these moves, to me, it it's awfully coincidental, and I don't see another way of justifying it.
I agree.
So that's kind of how I think about it. And look, I mean, as far as the open source thing goes, we're in a world where we put a lot of information on the internet. We don't have control of it. We don't have provenance for it. We don't know whose is what. And I think, was it irresponsible to train AIs on that? I don't think so. Every artist I know grew up listening to Dylan before they learned to play guitar and write songs. Humans are inspired. And even if it was, to me, the upside of what we're building here means we need to take all the human knowledge and get it in there. Now, how do you keep from ripping people off? We tried to solve that with copyright a long time ago. I think we ran a little while by extending copyright to like 70 some odd years now. Mickey Mouse finally went out of copyright this year, and they were kind of the prime offender. Disney was like pushing Congress and to extend copyright for decades, and it worked. So anyway, I think that lasts too long. You get 75 years for Mickey Mouse, and I only get 20 for inventing a nuclear reactor. Come on, that's not reasonable.
Yeah.
So we take these things as if they were written by God, and they were not. And so I think we gotta, reimagine how we manage some of these things. We live in a world where we got more people than ever making a living doing something they call creative. I don't know how creative it all is, but those are your artists and musicians and everything, and you want to have some compassion for them. But the fact is, we also need to move beyond this point where we're subsidizing this if it's not really providing a value.
There is one joke I used to say, look, hey, got this really good idea for a company. So what I do is I'm going to basically gather all this data, this copyrighted data, put it through a machine learning model, and then sell the querying. And so that in one extreme, obviously we should avoid. But I think, I like your perspective, and I think that we should be more open. I think these companies need to be more open about their plans.
Here's the real. The way I think this plays out is that right now we're in this moment where we've managed to do this kind of cool party trick of building these giant models. And the truth is the valuable models going forward will be much more specialized. They will be proprietary. They will have proprietary data that you never saw. They'll be running proprietary algorithms. You don't know what they are. There'll be web services. And there'll be a multitude of AIs.
What do you think Chemify's doing?
That talk to each other. Exactly. I don't fucking know how your thing works. All I know is I'm going to click buy now and drugs are going to show up. And that's exciting. So I think that's kind of the future we get to. And a lot of people misunderstand that right now. But it's course correcting. And we're going to get to a point real soon where every company will have their own model, their own AI running on their own data. And you won't get to see the insides, but you'll get to they'll expose a API for what they're good for, and that's how it should be.
Chemify in a way is the first company to learn how to build the data collection system for chemistry.
Cool.
And it's a bit like by making.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of really interesting there. And I think that obviously there'll be other Chemifys out there, right?
Yeah.
And it will happen, right? I hope to be open enough that the standard is out. So the standard, KDL's a standard. I've released it.
Yeah, cool.
So, and when I get round to it, I'm going to be building a standards organization that'll be a non-profit, help drive the chemists along, because there's an educational thing here for this as well.
Yeah.
But I think there's lots of good things that are going to happen in time. One of the things, going back to this your comment on regulation, I totally agree. It's in the UK, we had this absolutely wild and weird thing called responsible innovation.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me angry. But then I get made out that I'm some kind of, terrorist who wants to, and I'm saying, well, what is responsible innovation? And they say, well, responsible innovation is you should think about it before you do it. I was like, I think responsible innovation is just do everything you can, but do it openly, and also have a dialogue with society.
It's one of these things where just because it's well-meaning doesn't mean it's good, right? And in my mind, this is why we have societies and ecosystems. This is why we have governments. Look, I'm an inventor. It's not my job to imagine all the ways people might do stupid shit with my invention.
Mm-hmm.
Did the inventor of the hammer figure out that it could be a weapon? Probably it was invented to be a weapon. And then we figured out a bunch of useful shit. And if we didn't have hammers, we wouldn't be here. So to me, it's kind of like trying to place the blame in the wrong place much too early. It's like, look, society will figure out if the invention is good or bad or useful and in what context and whatnot. and we'll make those bounds over time.
Exactly.
You can't short circuit that.
Needs to legislate through politics, through the legal system.
Yeah.
To make, and I should not be.
Once there are actual problems that are observable and measurable, and we know what to do, and we know how to stop them.
I mean, one of the things about computation, we might solve. We might.
Yeah.
Wouldn't solve the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Yeah. You will solve some big problems, one way or another. Like, it's practically guaranteed, because you're building a toolkit, and when you build toolkits, you build solutions to everything. I mean,
will people use computers to do things, to do nasty stuff? Sure.
Right.
Can we make sure that we will prevent them where possible by having, issuing licenses and coding and using special encryption techniques? Sure. Should we have a fail to safety methodology? Sure. If I was going to design nuclear reactors again, I wouldn't use liquid sodium around it.
No, you would use liquid sodium.
I wouldn't use liquid sodium.
No, you would.
No.
You wouldn't use water.
Well, I wouldn't use any of those. There's different, but anyway, there's ways of not having those.
The liquid sodium's much better. We don't have reactors that are using liquid sodium yet.
There was I don't know when in the UK, there was a proposal where you had a liquid sodium jacket and then you have a water jacket on that.
Oh, no, you don't want the water. The water is terrible. Oh, God, that's you don't want the sodium and the water, one or the other.
But you have to then drive it. But anyway, we're kind of diverting. But yeah, I think that there are. But again, you should be allowed to do stupid things.
Yes.
And I'm not.
You do stupid things in a way that sinks the dinghy, not the ship.
Yeah. Well, I think humans are very good at doing stupid things.
No, a lot of them are doing stupid things that aren't productive, though.
Yeah. Well, I think over worrying and kind of trying to figure out. And there's all this, like, I think being what you were saying about people trying to be well-meaning, but they're not actually doing any good. And I mean, like I say, I'm an anarchist.
Yeah.
Intellectual anarchist.
Yeah.
And I do not want to be told what
That's
to do.
Right. Exactly right.
I want to go where my curiosity takes me.
Exactly right. That's so important.
But first of all, build a $10 billion, $100 billion company.
Good, do it. And we'll spend all the money figuring out, like, why the hell we're here.
Just 3D printing meth on the moon.